My parents chose my sister's beach trip over my wedding. My parents skipped my wedding for my sister's beach trip. Months later, when they came begging me to attend my sister's, my answer was simple: not this time. My name is Jacob. I'm 32 years old, and a little over a year ago, I got engaged to the love of my life, Olivia. She's 28, and we've been together for 5 years, so when I finally popped the question during a quiet weekend getaway, it wasn't a surprise to anyone. It was just the natural next step in a relationship that had felt right from the very beginning. When we shared the news, everyone in my family seemed genuinely happy for us. There were congratulatory calls, excited texts, and promises of celebrations to come. My parents told me how proud they were. My younger sister, Madison, who's 27, was thrilled, and my oldest brother, Ethan, 36, said he was already looking forward to the big day. On the surface, everything was perfect. A new marriage was on the horizon, and the family was seemingly united in their support. Olivia and I didn't waste much time in picking our wedding date. It wasn't a random pin on a calendar. It was the anniversary of the day we first met. That day had always been special to us, a little milestone we celebrated every year, and the idea of transforming it into our wedding anniversary felt poetic, like closing one beautiful circle and starting another. We booked a beautiful rustic venue, put down the deposit, and dove headfirst into the whirlwind of planning. Initially, my family was all in. My mother was asking about color schemes and floral arrangements. My father was already joking about the epic, tear-jerking speech he was going to give. Madison and Ethan wanted to know all the details about the venue. There wasn't a single red flag, not a hint of the storm that was about to break. A few weeks into the planning, however, the tone started to shift. It began subtly, with a casual comment from my mom during a phone call. She gently mentioned that our chosen date might be a little tricky for some people. I didn't think much of it at the time, but then Madison became vague, dropping hints about a potential conflict. Soon after, Ethan mentioned something about a corporate retreat that happened to fall around the same time. The excuses started piling up, each one making our wedding feel less like a priority and more like an inconvenience they had to navigate. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just scheduling conflicts, the kind of thing that happens when you're trying to coordinate a big event. But then Madison made her unhappiness crystal clear. She called me, her voice tight with frustration, and informed me that our wedding was scheduled for the exact same week as her annual ladies' trip, a vacation she and her friends had taken together for years. To hear her talk about it, you would think this trip was a sacred, non-negotiable event. She acted as if I had personally orchestrated this conflict, calling the timing awful and complaining that she didn't want to be forced to choose between her vacation and her own brother's wedding. Olivia and I were completely baffled. We had set our wedding date months in advance, sending out save the dates as soon as the venue was booked. Madison's trip was something she and her friends could literally schedule for any other week of the year. It wasn't a work obligation, a family emergency, or a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It was a vacation. I tried to be reasonable. I told her that of course we wanted her there, but we weren't going to change the date. The day was significant to us, and all the major arrangements were already locked in. That's when my mother began to apply pressure. She called me separately, urging me to find a compromise, arguing that Madison shouldn't have to miss out on something that was so important to her. I remember feeling a flash of anger. Our wedding is important to us, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. It's one of the most important days of our lives. But instead of backing down, my mother doubled down, framing me as the difficult one, the one who was being inflexible. Then Ethan chimed in. He explained that our wedding fell on the same weekend as his company's big annual retreat. He made sure to mention that he went every year, that it was crucial for networking and team building. He wasn't as demanding as Madison, but the implication was clear. He would have a difficult decision to make, and it was my fault for putting him in that position. At that point, it felt like my entire family was treating our wedding as an optional event, something they would graciously attend only if it fit perfectly into their existing schedules. My father, who had been mostly silent through all of this, finally offered his 2 cents. There's just a lot going on that time of year, he said with a shrug, as if that simple statement justified their complete lack of consideration. Olivia was stunned. She had always had a great relationship with my family, and she couldn't comprehend their reaction. She asked me, her voice full of genuine confusion, if they had always been this way, if they always prioritized their own convenience over showing up for me. And as I thought about it, I realized with a sinking feeling that they had. There was a pattern. They expected the world to revolve around them, and I had spent most of my life accommodating that expectation. My mother, sensing she wasn't getting anywhere, proposed another solution. We should just postpone the wedding. She presented it as a reasonable request, as if we were the ones being stubborn, when in reality, we were the only ones being asked to blow up our plans for everyone else. By then, I had reached my limit. I told them, in no uncertain terms, that the date was final. We were not postponing our wedding just so Madison could sip margaritas on a beach or so Ethan could attend a business function. We had given everyone more than enough notice. They were welcome to come if they wanted to, but we were done rearranging our lives to fit their schedules. Madison did not take it well. She launched into a tirade about how I was being selfish, how family should always come first. I reminded her that this was my wedding, not a casual family dinner. If she truly wanted to be there, she could miss one vacation. The situation began to escalate. A cousin called me, letting me know that my family was telling anyone who would listen how difficult I was being. They had completely flipped the narrative. In their version of the story, they weren't the ones failing to prioritize a major life event. I was the one creating drama by having the audacity to expect them to be there. Some of our extended family members supported me, but others seemed to think I was stirring up unnecessary conflict. Olivia was my rock through all. She kept telling me not to let them get to me, and she was right. We were happy with our decision, and we refused to let their childish behavior ruin our excitement. I issued one final ultimatum to my family. The date was set. We weren't changing it. If they wanted to be there, great. If not, that was their choice, but the debate was over. Of course, Madison and my mother refused to accept that. They kept pushing, kept arguing, and that's when I finally understood. This was never just about a scheduling conflict. This was about control. My family was used to me bending over backwards for them, and they couldn't stand the fact that for the first time, I was standing firm. Fine, I thought. If they didn't want to come, that was their loss. But I was done begging them to attend my wedding. The day after I made it clear the date was non-negotiable, the guilt trips for Madison started. There were no more arguments, just a relentless stream of messages designed to make me feel terrible. She went on and on about how she had been looking forward to her trip for months, how she had already paid for everything, and how unfair it was that she was being forced to choose between a vacation and her own brother's wedding. Every few hours, another text would pop up, each one more passive-aggressive than the last. She was no longer asking me to change the date. She was acting as if I had personally victimized her by refusing to do so. Then, my mother joined the campaign. Her initial messages were more subtle, filled with platitudes like family should always come first, and you'll understand when you have kids someday. But it didn't take long for her to drop the pretense. She started texting me about how disappointed she was, how my stubbornness was tearing the family apart. Apparently, Madison wasn't the only one with a problem. She began vaguely mentioning other family members who were supposedly upset, though she never provided any names or specifics. It was just a constant barrage of so many people feel like you don't care about your own family. Ethan, meanwhile, went completely silent. No texts, no calls, nothing. He hadn't been as vocal as Madison, but it was obvious he had chosen his side. I sent him a couple of messages about non-controversial wedding details, just to test the waters, and received no response. He had decided his corporate retreat was more important, and that was that. Then my father finally spoke up, and it was perhaps the biggest disappointment of all. I had held out a sliver of hope that he might be the voice of reason. But instead, he called me and, after a long, awkward pause, said that he and my mom were debating whether or not to attend. He tried to frame it as if skipping my wedding was some unavoidable consequence of family drama, not a conscious choice they were making. He mumbled something about not wanting to cause any stress on our wedding day, but the message was loud and clear. They were angry that I was refusing to cave, and they were willing to skip their own son's wedding to punish me for it. Olivia's parents, on the other hand, were absolutely appalled. They had been watching this whole saga unfold, and when they heard that my own parents might not show up, they were done being polite. They called us, reassured us that we were in no way in the wrong, and promised that no matter what my family decided, they would support us completely. Their unwavering support was a lifeline in a sea of emotional manipulation. Olivia and I made a pact then and there. We would not wait for my family's approval. The wedding was happening, with or without them, and we were going to enjoy every second of planning it. We finalized the arrangements, organized the catering, and focused on creating a day that would be joyful and beautiful, regardless of who was in the audience. That's when the family truly began to fracture. Some relatives, like my Aunt Diane, called to congratulate us and confirm their attendance, but others were clearly siding with my parents and Madison. I started hearing through the grapevine that my mother and Madison had launched a full-blown smear campaign, complaining to anyone who would listen about how unreasonable and cruel I was being. They claimed I was the one causing a rift by refusing to compromise. Then came the Facebook post. My mother never mentioned me by name, of course, but it was painfully obvious who it was about. It was a long, passive-aggressive rant about how some people forget the importance of family and how it's a shame when selfish actions tear loved ones apart. The comment section was a cesspool of vague agreement from a slew of relatives, all chiming in to support her. Olivia saw it and didn't even flinch. She just told me not to engage. She recognized it for what it was, a desperate attempt to bait me into more drama. And she was right. If I had responded, it would have exploded into an even bigger catastrophe. So we stuck to our plan. We sent out the official wedding invitations. We included every single member of my family, making it clear that despite everything, the door was still open. That's when Madison and Ethan made their decision official. They both declined. There was no phone call, no explanation. They simply mailed back their RSVP cards with a firm no checked. My parents, however, remained in limbo. They didn't decline, but they didn't accept either. They were still holding out hope that I would break. Then, a cousin gave me the final piece of the puzzle. My mother and Madison weren't just complaining. They were actively, albeit subtly, discouraging other family members from attending. They never explicitly said, boycott the wedding, but their constant negativity and portrayal of me as the villain was enough to make some relatives hesitant to get involved. That was my breaking point. I was done. I was done trying to appease people who so clearly didn't care about my happiness. I wasn't going to spend another minute begging my own family to show up for me. Olivia and I sat down that night, looked at each other, and made a final decision. We were not going to waste another second of our energy on them. Our wedding was going to be amazing, whether they were there or not. And when the time came for our honeymoon, we booked it without telling them a thing. The morning of the wedding arrived. I woke up early, staring at the ceiling for a few moments as the reality of the day washed over me. After months of stress, tension, and family drama, the day was finally here. Olivia was in another room with her bridesmaids, the house already buzzing with excitement and nervous energy. Her family had been up since dawn, making sure every last detail was perfect. Then my phone vibrated on the nightstand. It was a text from my cousin. Just so you know, your parents, Madison, and Ethan aren't coming. There was no explanation, no last-minute change of heart. Just the cold, hard confirmation of what I already knew. I put my phone down, took a deep breath, and got dressed. My suit fit perfectly. Everything was in place. Downstairs, Olivia's parents were orchestrating everything with grace and love. They made sure the cars arrived on time. They greeted guests at the door, and they had a playlist of our favorite songs filling the house. It was clear they had stepped up in a profound way. They weren't just acting like the bride's parents. They were acting like my parents, too. The ceremony was beautiful. The venue was packed, except for the 4 empty seats we had reserved for my parents, Madison, and Ethan. I had prepared myself for it, but seeing those empty chairs in the front row was still a gut punch. Olivia's father walked her down the aisle. Her mother was already in tears, and her brother stood by her side, beaming with pride. On my side, there were a few cousins, some aunts and uncles who had refused to buy into my mother's narrative, and, in the biggest surprise of the day, my Aunt Diane. I hadn't been sure if she would come, but just as the ceremony was about to start, she slipped into one of the empty chairs. Later, at the reception, she pulled me aside, shook her head, and said, "I don't care what your mom says. You're my nephew, and I wasn't going to miss this for the world." Olivia and I exchanged our vows. The officiant pronounced us husband and wife, and just like that, it was done. No more drama, no more waiting. The moment we kissed, the entire room erupted in cheers. The roar of applause and joy completely drowned out any lingering thoughts I had about my absent family. The reception was a blur of happiness. Olivia's family enveloped us in so much love and attention that it was impossible to feel anything but joy. Toasts were made, glasses were clinked, and the food was incredible. Every time I looked around, one of Olivia's relatives was checking in on us, making sure we had everything we needed, making our day feel even more special. My family's attempt to cast a shadow over our wedding by not showing up had failed spectacularly. Halfway through the night, a member of the venue staff handed me an envelope. It was from my parents. Inside, there was a check and a small, folded note. I opened it. It read, "We hope you learn the value of family someday." I folded the note, slid it back into my pocket without a word, and put the unread check in my jacket. Olivia, who sees everything, noticed a shift in my demeanor immediately. She squeezed my hand under the table and seamlessly continued the conversation as if nothing had happened. We danced, we laughed, we took hundreds of photos. Nothing was going to ruin this night. Soon, pictures and videos from the wedding started to flood social media. Guests were commenting on how beautiful everything was. A few of my relatives even tagged my parents with comments like, "Wishing you were here." Hours later, Madison made her feelings known with a cryptic Instagram story. A black and white photo of a sunset with the caption, "Some people don't value family traditions." It wasn't surprising, but it was still disappointing to see her doubling down instead of doing even a moment of self-reflection. The next morning, I had a voicemail. It was my mother. Her voice wasn't yelling, but it was thick with that familiar tone of righteous indignation she used when she wanted me to know I was in the wrong. She went on a long ramble about how the family was falling apart, how I had pushed them all away, and how Madison and Ethan were heartbroken. She used phrases like, "After everything we've done for you, I never thought my own son would do this to us." Then came a text from my father. "I regret how things turned out." When I pushed back, asking if he had made any attempt to reason with my mom or Madison, he completely dodged the question. His regret wasn't about what had happened. It was about the consequences of his own cowardice. Olivia watched me read the messages and just rolled her eyes. "Our wedding was perfect," she said firmly. "Don't let them rewrite the narrative." She was right. We packed our bags and left for our honeymoon, not telling a soul where we were going. The honeymoon was a dream. For 3 weeks, it was just me and Olivia, completely disconnected from the world. We had chosen a beautiful resort with white sand beaches and a sense of peace that made the family drama feel like a distant nightmare. For the first few days, we kept our phones off, determined to have no interruptions. But you can't outrun family drama forever. One morning, I turned on my phone to check the time and was instantly flooded with a tidal wave of missed calls, unread texts, and notification from the family group chat. At first, I ignored it. But then Olivia's phone lit up too. My mother, my sister, and even Ethan had been trying to contact both of us relentlessly. Something was happening. I opened the group chat, and it was pure chaos. My mother was in the middle of a complete meltdown, publicly calling out the family members who had dared to attend our wedding. She accused them of betraying the family, of encouraging my disrespectful behavior, and of taking sides. Aunt Diane was her primary target. My mother had sent a long, dramatic message about how loyalty clearly doesn't mean much these days. Madison, of course, jumped in to support her, complaining about how upset she was that anyone would celebrate my wedding instead of considering the bigger picture. The bigger picture, apparently, being her vacation. One of my cousins finally had enough. "Let me get this straight," she wrote. "You skipped your own son's/brother's wedding for a vacation and a work event, and now you're mad at the people who actually showed up? Make it make sense." Madison completely ignored her and pivoted back to playing the victim. Meanwhile, Ethan had sent me a private message. He claimed he didn't expect things to escalate this quickly, and that he had been trying to remain neutral. "I don't want to get in the middle of it," he wrote. It was too late for that. My mother then changed tactics and started messaging Olivia directly, a long, guilt-inducing text about how I was tearing the family apart and how Olivia needed to calm me down before it was too late. Olivia read the message, let out a groan of annoyance, and replied without a second of hesitation, "We're on our honeymoon. We are not interested in this drama." She then put her phone down and went back to her martini. In the group chat, the tide was starting to turn. While my mother and Madison were still raging, a growing number of relatives were beginning to push back. More photos from the wedding had surfaced online, and it was undeniable how happy everyone looked. Then, Aunt Diane snapped. "You are embarrassing yourselves," she wrote. "You made your decision. Now live with it." That's when my father sent me another quiet, half-hearted text. "I regret how things turned out." Same empty words. No action. Madison then somehow found out we were on our honeymoon. When she realized we had left the country without a word, she became even more agitated. The group chat blew up again with her accusations about how we clearly didn't care about them. That was enough for me. I sent one final message to the group. "You all made your choices. I made mine. Have a good week." Then I muted the chat for good. Returning home was like stepping into an alternate reality. We had spent 3 weeks in paradise, while my family had apparently descended into a self-made hell. The first thing I saw was my mother's latest Facebook screed, another impassioned diatribe about how some people allow strangers, presumably Olivia, to destroy unbreakable family bonds. Madison had followed up with her own sad girl post, a photo of her looking wistfully into the distance with the caption, "Some bonds aren't as strong as you think." A cousin filled me in on the rest. The family was divided. Some thought my parents and Madison were being ridiculous, while others just wished the whole thing would blow over, prioritizing peace over justice. Then, my father showed up at our house unannounced. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. He wanted to talk. He claimed that he had disagreed with my mother and Madison from the start, but had felt powerless to stop them. He said they'd been so furious in the weeks leading up to the wedding that if he had pushed back, there would have been consequences for him, too. Olivia sat listening silently, her expression unreadable. I didn't believe him, and I could tell she didn't either. He had stood by and watched as his wife and daughter tried to sabotage our wedding. Now that it had all blown up in their faces, he wanted to play the role of the helpless mediator. Olivia didn't hold back. She calmly but firmly told him that he hadn't been helpless. He had been complicit. He had watched them spin lies and guilt-trip relatives and had done nothing. That's when I told him what I needed. "If you really support me," I said, "you need to say it. Not just to me, but to them. You need to stand up for me, publicly." He immediately recoiled, mumbling about how complex it all was, how he didn't want to make things worse. In other words, he was still too afraid to take a stand. That was all I needed to hear. After he left, I received one final, unhinged text from Madison, a long rant about how selfish I was and how I had destroyed the family's harmony. That was it. I was done. I blocked her number. No more texts, no more passive-aggressive social media posts. She was gone. Not long after, Ethan reached out. His message was simple. I should have done more. "I am sorry." There was no justification, just an admission that he had failed to show up for me. In that moment, I realized that some members of my family would never change. My mom and Madison were still convinced they were the victims. My father was too cowardly to challenge them. But Ethan was starting to see the truth. It wasn't enough to fix anything, but it was enough for me to know that Olivia and I were making the right choice by moving forward without them. Months passed. After the wedding chaos and the social media meltdowns, I thought my family had finally accepted the new reality. Olivia and I had settled into a happy, quiet life, free from the constant drama. Then, out of the blue, the text from my mother started again. At first, it was just a casual checking-in message. When I didn't respond, she ramped it up, reminding me that Madison's wedding was approaching, acting as if I was the one who owed them an apology. Madison, who had been silent since I blocked her, suddenly unblocked me. She didn't message me, but she started liking old photos of mine from years ago. Olivia saw it immediately. "They want something," she said, her voice flat. She was right. A few days later, a cousin let it slip. Madison was getting married. That was the reason for the sudden outreach. She wasn't trying to mend fences. She needed me to attend her wedding to complete the picture of her perfect day. Then the invitation arrived in the mail. No personal note, no apology, just a standard invitation addressed to me and Olivia. She stared at it, then looked at me. So, she just expects us to pretend nothing happened. Apparently, yes. My mother's text became sickeningly sweet, full of talk about family unity and new beginnings. Ethan called, explaining that Madison and my mother saw this as the perfect opportunity for everyone to move on. Then Madison herself finally messaged me. It wasn't an apology. She was, in her words, being the bigger person and said she would forgive me if I showed up. That was all I needed to see. I responded with a single sentence. "I thought you didn't care about inconvenient wedding dates." Then I RSVP'd no. My mother immediately started calling. I ignored her. She left a voicemail filled with the same old manipulative nonsense. I was tearing the family apart. I was being petty. I was ruining Madison's special day. I didn't respond. Days later, word had spread. Madison was furious, telling everyone I was immature and resentful. Olivia just laughed when she heard it. "I have an idea," she said with a grin. "Let's book a trip that weekend." And so we did. A luxury resort. A weekend of pure relaxation. We made sure to mention it casually to a few cousins, knowing the news would get back to Madison. The calls and messages stopped abruptly. They knew they had lost. The weekend of Madison's wedding came and went. Olivia and I spent on a beach, completely unconcerned. There were no last-minute pleas, no final guilt trips. They had finally understood. We were free. The aftermath was predictable. A cousin who attended told me Madison had spent a good portion of her reception complaining about her absent brother, painting herself as the tragic victim. A few days later, my mother posted one of her signature ambiguous statuses about how some people can't put the past behind them. I had heard that Ethan had tried to reason with them, admitting that the family had handled things poorly, but he still wouldn't explicitly condemn their actions. I owed them nothing. My final interaction with Madison was a text from her, a phony olive branch, saying, "It would mean a lot if you came, but I understand if you're still holding a grudge." I didn't waste my time. "You weren't willing to change your plans for my wedding," I replied, "but I'm supposed to drop everything for yours." She immediately flipped, accusing me of being selfish and fixated on the past. The mask had slipped, revealing the same entitled person underneath. My mother called one last time, tearful and frantic, claiming the family was breaking apart because of me. I told her plainly, "You and Madison made your choices, and now I'm making mine." That was the last call I ever took from her. The last piece of news I heard about the wedding came from Ethan, days later. He said the whole event had been a fiasco, thick with tension because of the family feud. And Madison, in a final petty move, made an Instagram post about being grateful for the real family who showed up and cutting toxic people out of her life. The irony was breathtaking. It's been over a year since Madison's wedding, and the silence from my family has been deafening. The dust has settled, and the consequences of their actions have slowly come to light. Madison's fairy tale marriage, the one that was apparently more important than mine, is already falling apart. A cousin told me that less than a year in, she and her new husband were constantly fighting. It turned out that rushing into a marriage to prove a point isn't a solid foundation. My mother, predictably, is still playing the victim, refusing to acknowledge her role in any of this. My father has resorted to pathetic, silent gestures, liking photos Olivia and I post of our happy life, a cowardly attempt at solidarity without any actual support. Ethan, however, has started to see the light. He's been reaching out casually, and I can tell the constant turmoil has worn him down. Then, the real twist came. Olivia and I found out we were expecting a baby. It was the most joyful news of our lives. We kept it quiet at first, sharing it only with the people who had stood by us. Of course, my mother found out through the grapevine and immediately made it about herself, texting me, "I hope you don't punish your child the way you punish your family." That was the final straw for Olivia. She blocked my mother and Madison from everything. My father sent his usual text, pleading with me to mend things before the baby arrives, asking me to forgive and forget. I told him that only positive, supportive people would be a part of our child's life. No exceptions. We threw a large baby shower and didn't invite my parents, Madison, or Ethan. It wasn't spiteful. It was a simple statement of fact. We had our own support system, our own family. The shower was beautiful, happy, and completely stress-free. They weren't on the guest list, and that was the greatest victory of all. We had moved on, and we were building our future, finally free from the weight of their negativity. The family had lost its grip on us for good.